What I'm going to talk about now, though, is some of the platform differences. Because although OpenAL is a cross-platform API, you still want to try and play to the strengths of each platform, because lowest common denominator doesn't cut it. Xbox 360 then, it's got XMA compression. I have all the lines, please, I think. Okay, thanks. You've got XMA compression, AC3, 5.1 compressed surround, and just about everything else is done in software on the 360. PS3, you've got rather more DSP than on the other platforms, really cool stuff like convolution and time stretch, and HDMI uncompressed 7.1 audio. So you've got to try and come up with a solution that takes advantage of that, and takes advantage of all the different sorts of PCs. So I'll look at each platform in turn. On the 360, you've got 128 sources that you can play simultaneously. Each one of those has got EFX, which means that you can potentially have multiple filters on that. You can be routing it dynamically to several reverbs. You can have 4 reverbs, either i3DL2, which is the standard set of labels, at least for the knobs on a reverb, or you can have the licensed stereo reverb, which is an eventide reverb that Microsoft have implemented in the firmware of the 360. The other things, per voice filters I've explained, and the fact that you've got stereo and surround out, but there's a couple of extensions to the way OpenAL works on the 360. Those are called the static and the desk buffer extensions. Static buffers, if you went to the talk about what Microsoft are planning to do for Vista, you'll understand this one. Static buffers are a way of playing things by just referring to the audio asset rather than making a copy of the audio asset. This does have one snag, which is that once you've told something to play, you have to be sure that you don't clobber the memory it was playing from while it's still going out. But it's well worth it, because it means that you can play lots of copies of the same thing without running out of memory. The desk buffer extensions are because in order to play XMA compressed stuff, you need to supply a little bit of extra data in order to be able to set the XMA decoder running. And so you supply a pointer to a little bit of extra information on the 360 if you want to play this compressed audio. And the result is you can get, I don't know, 7, 10 times more stuff into memory. There are some snags on the 360. The first one is because it's built on the standard X audio implementation that Microsoft are hunting out at the moment. It's got no HRTF, that's to say it's got no modelling of the acoustic model of your hearing, and there's no advanced spatialization either. Right. Also, you've got the XMP user soundtrack extensions. That's an important thing Microsoft require you to do on a 360 title. The trick there is that you've got to be able to tag a certain amount, certain assets in your game as things that could potentially be replaced by the player's own choice of music. And so there's an extension in OpenAL on the 360, which means when you play something you can say, this is the sacrificial victim, this is the thing that my game can do without, if the player really wants to be able to listen to their music as a replacement for yours, or possibly a replacement for your ambience too. So that's what I'm going to say about Xbox 360. You can get a lot more information about it if you're a Microsoft developer, because a lot of the information is really down to the implementation of the firmware and the hardware there. What OpenAL gives you is the ability to run exactly the same code on the Xbox 360 and play uncompressed assets. If you want to play compressed assets, all you have to do is change the play call to provide the extra information about the XMA compression. So, we move on from there to Jason Page's masterwork, the PlayStation 3 implementation. Now, again, you really want to talk to people from Sony if you want to know the details about this, but there's a software mixer again on the PlayStation 3. They've made extraordinary performance out of the SPU co-processors in a way that I only hope the graphics people will catch up with sometime. You can do 412 voices just on a single one of the 6 co-processors. All of the mixing and the sample rate conversion is done in the frequency domain, so it's very, very high quality. And since everything's being broken down into frequency bands, this means that you get 412 band EQ. To be honest, 412 band EQ is a lot of faders to push up and down at any given time, but you can map them into groups, and it gives you very fine control there. And that's on everything that you play, as a matter of course. The output, you've got Dolby Digital, you've got analog, and you've also got HDMI and compressed 7.1, which is the kind of thing that is probably not important now, but over the time scale that the PS3 has got to work on is important. And it's important to me as well because we can do 7.1 on the PC. If we can make the game work well in 7.1 with the same set of assets, I'd like it to come out nice on the PS3 for people who've gone out and bought the hardware. I also want it to work for the people who's listening on their mono televisions, but we get that too. So, it's not strictly OpenAL in that the way that you play things and the way that you refer to your sample data is different. It's not very different actually, but whereas OpenAL allows you to supply an arbitrary list of buffers, the way that it works on the PS3 is you just refer to a couple of buffers, and every time one of them's been used up, the PS2 comes back. PS3, ooh, Freudian slip, comes back and says, give us another one. So it's very easy to wrap that, but you do need to wrap the play function. Of course, once you've done that, you've also made sure that your XMA handling of the compression, A-track, MP3, or whatever on the PS3 is likewise seamless to the game code. The OpenAL API extends to all of the things that you'll be using to update the sounds in the game. For position and pitch and volume and velocity, for the sources, which is the OpenAL term for hardware channels, if you like, things that are actually playing, and also for the listener. On the PS3, you've got multiple listeners, which is really cool, and it's one of the things we're trying to get added onto OpenAL. If you want to do multiple listeners on OpenAL on all of the platforms, what you have to do is subtract the coordinate of the listener, other than the canonical one, and likewise do a little bit of matrix arithmetic in order to reorientate things. It's not too expensive, and you may be able to get away without multiple listeners, especially if you're not doing things like split screen, but it's a nice extra on the PS3. One thing though, it doesn't implement the EFX DSP extensions. That's the standard interface to filters and reverb and effects and so on that you get on the 360 and the PC. But the good news is that it does implement some very cool stuff of its own. Sidechain compression, pitch bend. And when I say pitch bend, I'm not talking about playing it faster. I'm talking about changing the pitch and leaving the duration the same. That's really cool. Vocoder, well, I immediately thought of a use for a vocoder in a game, but I guess if you wanted one, then it's nice to have one for free. Time stretch, the opposite of pitch bend. Convolution, well, probably the most powerful DSP technique that there is, and talk to people from Sony about that. They'll explain some ways that we can do that. There's 10 years of cool stuff to be experimented with there.